Welcome to this installment of Frank and Mary here in Southborough. For those of you who haven't watched the show before, my name's Art Bergeron. I'm an attorney at Myrick O'Connell. There are 70 of us. We do a whole bunch of different things, so everybody gets to do what they like. I like doing elder law. And this show is not about law, though. This show is about my friends Frank and Mary. If you see me do presentations at the Senior Center, you know that I always talk about my friends Peter, Paul, and Mary Jr., and their parents, Frank and Mary. And Frank and Mary's goal is to live in their house until they die and be buried in the backyard. And if they live in Southborough, that means they want to live in Southborough. They don't want to live in their house in someplace else now. So the question is, who do Frank and Mary need to know, and what programs do they need to know about so that they can stay right here? And with me to figure that out was my good friend Doug Peck, who is a Southborough person who of course I don't know anybody. Doug knows everybody. So he's really been the person who brings in the guests so we can have these conversations. Mm-hmm. And Doug, you've scored again.
I have, yes.
So you want to talk about who we got here?
Yes.
And yes, we'll talk a little bit.
We'll talk. This is Jeff Madden. Jeff is a case manager at Marlborough Hospital, and that's probably the most likely hospital people will go to, particularly in an emergency, coming from Southborough. Right. So
that's the default.
That's sort of the default,
because it's always
hospital.
the closest
hospital in an
and
emergency.
that's going to be the closest hospital.
I attend some meetings there. There's a lot of things going on there. New cancer unit, a bunch of things. But we want to talk about his role as a case manager.
As a case manager,
because it's a very critical role, not just for the hospital, but for you to know about should you go into the hospital.
Because Frank and Mary's going to get assigned a case manager if they go in.
Right.
So once again, I'm not. Doug always brings these great people that I don't know. So can you just tell us a little bit about how did you end up as a case manager in Marlborough Hospital?
It's sort of a long road to Marlborough Hospital. I started my nursing career at the Brigham doing oncology nursing. And that's sort of, it's a difficult, it's challenging type of nursing. And I did that for about 15 years. Then worked my way back through insurance companies. So I've worked, as some patients would say, on the dark side with the insurer company, and then worked my way back to acute medicine in the hospital as a case manager. And I've been now at Marlborough now for about 3 years.
That's really interesting, though, because you've seen it on the other side, and you
Yes,
know
sir.
that everybody on the other side isn't necessarily from the dark side. They've got you're balancing interests. And so in terms of making the case for this is a legitimate reason to keep this person in the hospital.
Indeed, most of the time whether it's the insurer looking at it, Medicare looking at it, or case managers for that fact look at cases, we're looking at leveling. What makes the patient need to be in the hospital as either an inpatient or an observation patient, and that's very important to Medicare. They look at criteria, they look at for severity of illness, how sick are you, and intensity of services. In other words, when we say that is, can the services be given somewhere else, is the question they pose.
Somewhere else meaning not in
the hospital.
But not in the hospital.
Correct.
At all.
So in the outpatient setting, at home, in a skilled nursing facility, those type of things. So that's how they determine whether or not a patient needs to be in the hospital.
And from being on the insurance side, you really can appreciate how you meet those criteria. Right?
Oh, absolutely. And they look at them very rigidly to fit those criteria. So does Medicare, right? So what we're doing now is working towards getting patients to really understand that. And we do some of that education in the hospital, but I think this particular avenue is great for patients. It's going to get to a broader audience.
And one of the things that Doug and I have often talked about is the fact that audience, well, we were just talking beforehand, I asked you that question, approximately what percentage of the bed days there are bed days where there's a person over 70 there, and your estimate was 75%. And those are the people who watch these shows. Those are the folks, local folks, maybe at home, and they're like condemned to watch us, right? Because they're home and they're stuck at home. So
what does two questions. What does a case manager do overall, and does everyone get one, so to speak?
So we certainly are.
Or do they have to pay extra to get you?
No, there's no extra. There's no extra.
There is an extra.
No extra
they
money
don't
for a
slip
case
somebody at
manager.
20 and then
No.
you get it.
We look at a patient when they come into the hospital, and we look at certainly what brings them in there. That's part of our job, what we call our utilization review or our leveling, which we just referenced. We also look at what's the patient's home life at home. Do they have support at home? Do they have family? Do they have services already? Do they live by themselves? Are they able to get to the grocery store? Are they able to do their shoppings, get to their doctor's appointments? So we look at them in terms of what their needs might be. And we look at them from...
Now, are you doing a medical piece of that? So that's a really interesting thing, because it's a strange blend of medical and kind of social, what I'll call environmental pieces regarding who that person is really in the community.
Well, case managers were a jack of all trades, right? So as it relates to that patient, we help the patient understand as well why they're there. In other words, you know, when you say to a patient, well, you have a PE, we're going to do a VQ scan, and we'll see what happens, right? So
And they'll say what?
right, most people don't understand that, right?
Yeah.
So part of what
I don't know what he just said.
Yeah.
Right?
part of what we do is we help the patients understand, you know, their diagnoses, what brought them into the hospital, as well as what the possible treatments are, and what their ongoing needs are going to be when they're ready for discharge, right? And so we look at whether or not they're going to need rehab, whether or not they're going to need services at home, whether through a visiting nurse or through, you know, perhaps some private pay, which we also have listing of. So we go through that whole holistic approach to the patient. I like to use holistic because that's how you really have to address many of these problems.
Right, right.
But a big piece of what else we do is make sure that they understand their level. In other words, if you're an observation patient, that means something very different than an inpatient does to a Medicare patient. As an observation patient, we all have heard of the 3 midnight rule, right? So as an observation patient...
You want to mention that. Many have, but only vaguely understand what that story is.
So what Medicare, when they say the 3 midnight rule, Medicare means that you are in the hospital for 3 overnight midnights at inpatient level of care.
So you've been admitted to the hospital.
Not necessarily admitted, but admitted as an inpatient.
Okay.
That's the distinction that a lot of people
As opposed
get,
to observation?
as opposed to observation.
Okay.
And they are very different, right? So, and it gets confusing because a patient in observation status, they say, well, I'm in the hospital.
Yeah,
I'm being
certainly,
cared for.
certainly feels like I'm admitted.
Correct.
Right?
So, for instance, a person who has chest pain, right? You have to go to the hospital. You're going to be admitted, and they're going to evaluate you. But you will be admitted as an observation patient, because what Medicare feels is that what's going on with you will take less than 48 hours to manage.
Oh, I see.
Right? So you're an observation patient. As an observation patient, that means that you, let's say a physical therapist saw you and says, hey, look, they need rehab. As an observation patient, you won't be able to access your skilled nursing benefit. Period, end of story. You can't go to a skilled nursing facility, you don't have the insurance for it.
You can go, but you're going to be paying for it privately.
Paying for it privately.
Right.
We sometimes will circumvent that regulation by using an acute rehab facility. Sometimes people who require that level of care, we can go to a place like a Fairlawn Rehab or a Braintree Rehab.
Or is Whittier included in that?
Whittier is sometimes included, but it gets even more convoluted, right? So Whittier has, it gets more and more convoluted. It's crazy,
This is
right?
brutal. This is brutal.
So Whittier has what they call with Medicare, for Medicare only, right? They're an acute rehab. They have a transitional care unit, so they do skilled nursing, and they have what they call LTAC, which you folks probably have never heard of.
Never heard.
LTAC is long-term acute chronic hospitalization. So it's for patients who are very, very sick, who mostly have been in an ICU, who require a G-mean length of stay somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 days at the rehab facility, right? If you don't meet all those criteria points, you don't even qualify to go there, right? But for Medicare, you have to qualify for those little qualifications to go there if you're a Medicare patient.
And I suppose...
So,
go
yeah,
ahead.
so
I was-
one of my
this is
questions. So you
we
help
could-
sort
we could-
this
we could
out
go
for
that
them.
way, but I
Yes,
don't want
right.
to... Yeah.
Right, so that's part of the reason why I have a job,
Okay.
right? So it's because
Because
these are-
no real human being could actually
No.
figure any of this out.
Heck,
You need one of you
you
special
don't.
guys.
Exactly
Right.
right. You know, I could go on the floor right now and do a nurse's job. I'm a nurse. But you can't take a nurse off the floor and say, okay, do case management. Because it's just, the education is not there, right? So that's part of why you need, another part of the reason why you need a case manager. And if you get admitted to the hospital, you want to find out who your case manager is.
And going back to Doug's original question, does everybody get one?
Yes. We look
By
at
virtue of being admitted, whether you're an observation or a...
inpatient. Your
Inpatient.
level of care doesn't matter.
Okay.
So you'll
that's
get
good.
a case manager assigned to you when you come into the hospital. And if you're in a group of, say, 70 and older, you're going to meet the case manager because you fall into what we would euphemistically call a high-risk category. In other words, you're likely to need something post-discharge, whether that's a simple visiting nurse or going to a
I
rehab
see. Not
facility.
high risk in terms of what you're there for, but
Correct.
in terms of
Your likelihood
you
of
need an
needing
exit
something.
strategy
Yeah.
Correct.
that's more complicated than you're driving home.
Correct. And
Yeah,
most
yeah,
of
yeah.
the time, you'll see a case manager in the emergency room if you're being admitted. We start the discharge planning and we start that discharge process in many cases before you're even admitted, because we'll look at the patients in the emergency room and we'll say, oh, okay, it's a 95-year-old who had a fall, who now has back pain, and yeah, probably going to be admitted with that. So we'll meet those patients and we'll evaluate what their home situations are. And oftentimes we're pleasantly surprised that, you know, they're independent, they're still driving, they're still doing their own thing. But in some cases, they're not. And we need to get more involved earlier, because it's sometimes getting a plan
Really early.
takes a little bit of time.
Right.
Right?
Now,
Particularly if they
Develop
need
that.
things in place when they go home.
Correct.
Right.
Not-
So you're, and one more question.
No, no,
So
'cause I
you're
was gonna-
involved in
yeah.
the discharge process. So if you get a sheet of papers when you get discharged, or one paper that says, this is your medication, this is
Yeah,
your
so what you're gonna
instructions?
what you're gonna get, the nurses give you, we call it an AVS, or an after visit summary. Right?
Okay.
So it'll be typically the doctors contribute to it, nursing contributes to it, physical therapy, the collaborative team approach.
Okay.
All contribute to that AVS. Our piece of it is, here is your discharge destination. In other words, where are you going?
Okay.
Who are you going with? How are you getting there? As I tell patients all the time, you know, I'm not the when person, because that's the most common question. So when can I be
Yeah.
discharged? Well, I tell
not a
patients,
when
you know,
guy.
I'm not the when guy. I'm where and how. You know,
Yeah.
important parts of that equation, but you know, the doctors and you and how well you progress through the care, that's going to determine the when of things. You know, we'll help you with your family and you as the patient to determine the where and the how.
Okay.
And what people have to understand, very importantly, is that they are the boss of their health care. Right? I often tell,
I just gonna, just
Yeah.
because we're
Yeah.
close on time, and I
We
want to
are.
go back to,
Yeah.
because this was Doug's question, was
Yes.
you're the boss of your healthcare unless you can't make a healthcare decision. So can
Correct.
you,
Correct.
as Doug really wanted, I know we wanted
We
to
wanted
talk,
to get to this,
hear
yeah.
about that, how you deal with that. If someone's
So-
walking in and, right.
So we're
So-
talking about a healthcare
healthcare
proxy, now,
right? So what everybody should have, whether you're 8 or 80, is a healthcare proxy, right? Is that someone, and a lot of people say, well, I don't want to give up my control, I don't want to do this. Well, part of what the healthcare proxy does is it extends your control in the event that you are unable to make decisions. So what you've done is you've made a determination that I want, you know, Peter or Paul to be my healthcare proxy. I want them, based on our conversations, because there should be a conversation around the healthcare proxy, not just signing the documentation. You should be outlining what your wishes are in the event that you needed certain
couldn't make decisions
emergency
on your own.
medical
Right.
treatment, right?
Right.
Very important to do that sooner than later, because as we all know, we get older, sometimes we get forgetful, sometimes we, you know, can't quite remember Peter or Paul's name, right? So if we get into that situation and you get into the hospital and you don't have a healthcare proxy, it becomes very difficult to manage your care, because now in the hospital, in the acute setting, we can work with what we call next of kin, right? So Peter or Paul can make decisions for Frank and Mary because they're the next of kin and it's an acute emergent situation. But now if, you know, they need rehab, skilled nursing facilities or rehab facilities aren't able to accept patients without a healthcare proxy, because somebody has to sign them in. And if you've been deemed, the patient has been deemed to lack capacity to make those decisions, can't go to skilled nursing rehab, and then you start to enter in the realm of guardianship
Mm-hmm.
and
yeah.
that cumbersome process that the state's put in the way.
So if I show up at that hospital, and I am a little confused, right? Which means I probably didn't find my proxy on the way to the hospital,
Right.
right?
Right.
I don't have
Right.
it with me.
Right.
Now what? What do you do in terms of trying to find the healthcare proxy?
So a lot of times people do have healthcare proxies, but you know, as we all know, it's in the firebox or
Yeah.
it's in this place.
In a safe place.
Exactly,
That's in a safe
right?
place.
So
Except I don't know exactly
exactly
where that
where it
is.
is, right? So what we'd like is a copy of that healthcare proxy, so that when you come to the hospital, you have that. We can scan it into our system, right? So it becomes part of your permanent electronic medical record that most hospitals are using now. Marlborough uses a system called Epic, and then that can follow you, you know, through your hospital stay. And then if you need to go to a rehab, we can print one out and send it to the. Actually, we don't have to print it out now. We can
just
just
send it to 'em.
electronically transfer it to the facility of your choice, and we can communicate that way so that your wishes are still known, and that person who you've designated is now able to sign you in and to help make decisions.
So their doctor should have one too, right?
Doctors should have one.
Right.
What I like to
Right.
recommend to my patients is to make several copies, and a copy is just as valid as an original
Okay.
in this particular instance. Your doctor should have one, your healthcare proxy should have one, and you should put a copy in your purse,
Just to have it around.
just to have it with you.
It's a pretty simple document overall, right? I
Absolutely.
mean, it's like a one-page.
It's a one page.
Is it
You
one
can
page document? Yeah.
you can print
Can
it
be.
out
Yep.
from
Yeah.
online.
Okay. Right.
Most doctors will have one. Most hospitals have them, and
We-
anyone
we-
can do it.
We should have him back to
Yeah,
talk
we
some
should.
more about this,
Yeah.
right? Because I think this is so many of your people, you know, are in this position, and so many of our people that we work with today and really need to be dealing
Yeah,
with this
we
stuff.
definitely will, because there's a lot
We-
more to go into.
there's more to
and,
go.
And what he does and what you should be thinking about when you go to the hospital.
I keep waiting for Doug to bring a really boring guest, you know, so that we don't like run out of. But thank you very, very much.
Yeah.
Absolutely, happy to be here.
Jeff, I really appreciate it.
We
Absolutely.
really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Great to meet you.
We'll be back right after the commercial that we don't have. Thank you very much, and we'll be back.
Thanks.
Thank you. So welcome back. Wasn't that a great commercial? So for the second half of our show, and it's actually going to be a little less than half because I, the moderator, did too long on the first one, right? Doug's got another great guest, kind of related in a way, but so Doug.
I think it's very related. We have Rebecca Wild-Wesley with us. She is a geriatric care manager, which is different than a case manager.
Correct.
So we're going to find out what the differences are and what she does.
Sure.
So you have your own business, right?
do.
You're not affiliated with a hospital to start
That's
off
correct.
with.
And I think
Okay.
that's one of the main differences between care managers and case managers. Case tends to be related to the institution or the insurance company. So care managers really distinguish themselves by being really focused on the client or whoever. We don't call that person a patient, but in a hospital setting, you're a patient. Underneath an insurance company, you might be, I don't know what they call it, an insurance company,
Yeah.
a member.
You're just a number.
yeah.
No, I
Right.
shouldn't put it
Just the number, yeah.
We stand in for the person. So we tend to think about the fact that we're going to have a long relationship with that elder. Often it's an elder because we are generally working with geriatric population. We're going to be with them often till the end of their lives.
Okay.
We'll be with them when they're in crisis, and we'll be with them when things are stable. And hopefully, again, it's a long relationship.
So
And I just want to mention
Yeah.
one thing, and the reason, when I tell my clients regularly, they say, well, what's a geriatric care manager? And I'd say, that's your person, it's your advocate.
your
It's a person totally working for you.
That's
It's
right.
kind of like what your lawyer's supposed to be. It's a person has no skin in the game.
Exactly.
No special interest, no
Right.
conflict, no how much is the hospital being paid, no.
It's what's best for you.
It's what's best for you, and that's it. I
That's
just
right.
wanted to mention that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, that's good. My other question is, so what's your background? We just had a nurse in here
Sure.
who was a case manager.
Right.
So what's,
So I'm a registered nurse
Okay.
also, and I have a master's in gerontology, which
Okay.
is another skill set that really allows us to have a lot more knowledge about all things aging. And I'm certified as a care manager, and I bet Jeff also has a certification.
Okay.
So care managers are certified. We have initials after our name, CCM or CMC, which indicates that we have passed a test, and we have to keep up with continuing education credits.
Okay. Oh,
and
good.
we also Many care managers are part of an association, Aging Life Care. We're also known as Aging Life Care Professionals. And we have a high standard of ethics. And really, again, the client is the center of our care. So all of the work that we do for people has a high ethical standard. We put the client in the center, and we make sure that we're doing things that are honorable on their behalf.
And now, are all geriatric care managers also nurses?
No, actually, I would say more of them are social workers. That tends to be the path that I see a lot of my peers coming out of nursing homes or often hospitals where they've been doing case management. Nurses, I think, are a smaller subset of the group. And there are other people doing care management who may have other backgrounds that are just slightly different. But if we're doing care management, if we're certified, we have the knowledge base to be able to provide that kind of care.
Right.
And it's in the home. This is where people are living,
Right.
wherever they call home. So
Right.
some of our people live in their homes. They live in assisted living because that's their home. They may live in a nursing home. And when they're in the hospital, we're in there and we're talking to case management because we want to make sure
Okay.
there's a nice, smooth transition. We give that background when they come in. That Jeff was saying, we want to know what your home is like, who are your caregivers, who's getting involved with care. We're the ones who often can be providing that information, especially with those who can't speak for themselves.
So what's a typical client like for you?
Yeah.
Do they have, or what are you typically doing for that client as well? Is it somebody with some maybe mild cognitive impairment, or family members are not able to help, they live in different parts of the country, or just have really busy lives? And the healthcare system is so complex nowadays. It's not just a system.
Right.
It's definitely not a system.
Right.
No,
It's just a
everything-
chaos.
disorganized
It's everything that
chaos.
goes on. When do I
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
my meds?
Yeah.
Right,
When do I
right.
need to go see the doctor again?
Right.
This is what the doctor told me, but what does this really mean?
Right.
Because you don't get to ask those questions of
That's
a
right.
doctor
Right.
time and time again.
So I would say yes to all of that.
Okay, so
So I would say the majority of our clients have dementia,
Okay.
and they may have a diagnosis, they may not, and that might be the stem of what's going on, is that nobody understands that there's an illness
Okay.
that's progressing and hasn't been diagnosed. And so often we spend time working with our clients and their families to achieve a diagnosis, because we know the earlier we know what the diagnosis is, the better able we are to be able to work on things like the healthcare proxy that you talked about, the important documentation, and we talk about finances, because now we know the illness we're dealing with, and we know likelihood of them needing to have a high level of care at some point in their life, and we need to make sure that everything is in order to be able to manage that.
And I know, once again, for my clients, I'll often say one of the things you expect from a geriatric care manager is maybe you want care in the home, maybe you want to go to an assisted living, maybe there are other issues you need to face, but you don't know who's who. You don't know the yellow pages of all of this.
That's
So
right.
you expect that geriatric care manager to know all of that,
That's
to know
right.
all the local organizations, what might fit for you, which is a very special thing,
Right.
as
And
opposed to going to visit everybody.
I agree,
right?
and I think that many families have been very good at doing research. I think where we come in is that we have a personal relationship with either the organizations where we might consider hiring somebody to help you stay at home but provide services, or to be able to move to an assisted living if that's in the forecast. And also we'll help, again, if they're in the hospital, when they get the list of 15 nursing homes they can go to for
Right.
skilled rehab,
Yeah.
that we can say, well, these are the ones I might aim for, and we start to individualize that a little bit for the best kind of outcomes. And in all ways, we want people to have the shortest amount of time in that acute setting, whether that's the hospital or the nursing home, and we try to bring them back to their home so that they have some more control over their space. And we're not doing the care. We're sitting often, we're planners. We help with those difficult conversations about that new diagnosis, or where's the best place to move, and should you be driving. So we help with that, and then we oversee the care that will be occurring. Maybe Medicare will be paying for the visiting nurse to come in, or for you to be in a nursing home setting, but we're there to give that extra oversight and to talk to family about what we're seeing, and to read a medical record. Nurses and social workers are really good at navigating through that sometimes it's a physical thick file, and sometimes it is through an electronic medical record, to be able to understand and translate if people don't understand what they have for diagnosis.
Because it's all in Greek. It's all in
Yes.
Latin. There are all
That's
these
right.
words that, as as a non-medical professional, you would have no idea.
Right.
And the other thing I think is really important is that once you've organized that care and the care is coming in, if there's trouble,
Right.
if there's a problem with a home care person, if there's
Right.
trouble at the assisted living,
Right.
now there's somebody the senior can really
Right.
count on, right?
That's right.
'Cause
And I
you don't
think
wanna
we're
call
trying
your
to
lawyer for
anticipate.
that, you know?
Yes.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
So I think we often find ourselves developing plan A, plan B, plan C, here's some options. And once we decide what we want, we're already looking at when something doesn't work.
That's what
What's
I
the
really
next
like
plan
about
that we
care,
need to have placed?
care managers.
That's a good
Right.
point.
Is
yeah.
to be able, that you have a care plan.
Right.
But not all plans go
Well,
as they
plans are
should.
modifiable,
They
and they
modify.
should
Not
So,
all plans
so,
work,
so
yes.
but it averts crisis when, you
Right.
know, because now it's not going from one crisis to another.
Right.
You have a plan. If
Yeah.
something comes up in the road, it's more of a speed bump
Right.
than the
Right.
car's
We
going,
talked
the
about
wheels are going to
this.
come
Yes.
completely.
Now it's happened,
Yeah.
Now
and
it's
this is
happened.
our plan.
This is how we're going to deal with
Yes.
it.
Right.
It's all been talked through, which is really just so
Right.
critical at a certain stage. Do you have a? You're not driven by sort of the age of the population so much as by sort of, again, other factors as well
Right.
as the age, or both?
I think mostly it tends to be that people, because a majority of the people, I think, do have an issue around memory, judgment, insight to what their issues are.
Right.
So often it's a diagnosis that might drive
Okay.
it, but it's really about the fact that something's no longer working
Yeah.
in their life. And I think people are aging well for longer than they used to. But I think at some point, even the most super ager, that 90-year-old who really is, that Jeff was speaking about, who comes in the hospital and really can go back home, at some point, usually there is a degradation of your ability to be able to maintain your lifestyle.
Right, because while everybody dreams in terms of dealing with death or the end of life, that God's going to allow somebody to just hit them in the back of the head and they're just going to be dead. Because
Yeah.
reality today, there is this space, and as you say, it's whether you're in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or 90s, there's going to be some space between the time that you're great and the time that you're dead.
Right.
And the question is, during that space, who can help you
Right.
navigate the system and live as well as possible?
Art, I love your saying space, because people will say, why did I name my business the Aging Space?
Yeah.
It is a space of time. And
Yes.
and if you're good, and there are people who don't just call us in crisis, there are people who call and say, I'm alone, I have no one, and I know I need to have a partner. So they're
'Cause they need a- 'cause
deliberately
they need a plan.
using
Yeah.
that time to be able to think about what's going to come next.
Yeah.
And they have a plan, and then sometimes that person, people will call us, we'll develop a plan, and then that's it. They're good for a year. Then they might call again. Something new has happened. They have a resource. They've got someone who's who's familiar with them and
Right.
able to give them advice for the next level of care.
Yeah.
And it might not be care. It just
Right.
might be choices.
Right, because the reality is that something's going to happen. And the more you can think about that and prepare for it, and
Right.
that's for where sort of a nursing background comes in, as you know, if it's a degenerative disease.
Right. There's a
There's
future.
stages. There's a
That's
future
right.
to what's going to
Right.
happen.
Right.
You don't know
And that's a- and
exactly,
that-
but
that's a good point,
you've got
yeah.
a good sense of what's going to happen. You can
Right.
prepare the person for it as well.
Right.
Because you have a relationship with them.
But that's a good point, Doug, because as you're saying, what you do know about life in that space is that it's changing. Is that it's changing. You're no longer in that kind of big long plateau that many of us live in for a lot of years.
Right.
And
Right.
that's what life is.
Right.
You're suddenly in a time where life is changing, and you want every day to be good, but you need a plan B, C, D, and to
Right.
keep changing as life is
Right.
changing.
Right. Yeah, so the whole family doesn't
Yeah.
become it doesn't become a turmoil situation for everybody. Not everything is a crisis.
Right.
If it's managed
That's right.
You
well.
mean
It's
sometimes it becomes
anticipated.
a crisis?
Yeah, Jeff, but only sometimes are the case.
So I think care managers have the mixed blessing of being able to see the future.
Yeah.
And that's based upon years of experience.
Right.
So, you understand what is coming up. And I think we never, the families still know their family member the best. So what we're all doing is we're all trying to get together with our visionary ability to see the future and their knowledge of how mom deals with crises. You're working together to be able to make the best plan for that person. And the plan for each person is different for the next. It's because we
Yeah.
are different.
'Cause we're all
So there
yeah.
is no cookie cutter way to handle what's going to happen when you get a certain diagnosis. Same diagnosis for two people, different way we're going to play that out in their
Okay.
lives.
Doug, it is just so great that you brought this person on, because I
Oh,
think
yeah.
to get folks a sense of how important this role is
Absolutely.
during this, what can be, it can be a week, but it can be years of your life, and to have somebody that you can trust, just
Yeah,
crucial.
and avoid a crisis situation.
And avoid a crisis.
Absolutely, and know what's going on and to go to the hospital
Yes.
as well.
Thank
Good.
you, thank you so much.
It was
You're
great
welcome.
to be here.
Good.
Yeah,
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
This is just,
this
this
Always
is
a good
terrific.
conversation.
So I
It is.
hope you've enjoyed this. I think some of these themes and these people are going to be coming back, because
Yes.
these are really important topics. In the meantime, we'll see you on the next installment of Frank and Mayor here in Southborough. Thank you.